I'm very excited to introduce our next speaker, Professor Isabelle Ansorge, who will be talking to us on student-supervisor relations. For those who don't know who Professor Ansorge is, she's the head of department of oceanography at the University of Cape Town. Professor Ansorge has been supervising students for the best part of 20 years and has supervised me for about 8 years. She has taken so many oceanography students to sea, including myself, on both the old and the new Agulhas, and in 2016 started the very successful semester program, which provides opportunities for postgrads all over the country to go to sea and learn about the ocean. So Isabelle, please take it away.
Hi, thanks Marcel. It's wonderful to be part of the strange world, because I'm just talking to a large crowd. I hope people are listening, but I'm essentially just staring at my my screen. I've got a little snazzy little scarf on, but actually underneath are my pajamas. So we live in this strange world. But before I start, I just want to check that everyone can hear me, that can you see me and hear me? Because I'm just seeing the screen. Okay.
Yeah, I can see you.
Okay. So thank you very much. I'm going to talk a little bit from the heart and also from my own experiences really as a student. So I've really put together a very informal talk. I'm really looking at sort of telling you all about how I was as a student, how I became a lecturer, but interacted with the students, and now my role as an HOD. And I hope that there are some words of wisdom. But the one thing I've experienced is a wonderful journey in my academic life. And I really think when I look back, what I look back most fondly is my interaction with the students, and particularly when I grew up with them. And I'll give some really good photos of those early days when we used to go a little bit crazy on the Agulhas 1 and maybe the sort of first or 2 cruises of the SA Agulhas 2. Since then, I've grown up quite a bit. Okay, so I'm going to be talking from 1993 to 2001, which is when I was a grad student. I'll be talking a little bit about 2002 to 2016, when I was a postdoc and then a lecturer. And I guess from now, where I'm HOD and where I'm not really able to do that much in the way of research or go to sea. But I started young. Here's photos of me when I was 13 and again 14, and I've also put my details down. So I grew up on the boats. My parents were mad sailors. They were forever taking me out sailing, and it was just natural for me to continue working on the oceans and do something. I originally wanted to be a marine biologist. I really was fascinated by everything that you could scoop up in a net, but that sort of moved more and more towards physical oceanography. But one thing is that I can't remember my undergraduate days. I was at Plymouth University, and I remember kind of vaguely going to my lectures, but I don't remember much. And I find that quite, when I lecture students and I see them in the back on their phones and stuff, and I realize that even as lecturers now, we only really interact with our students from postgraduate. Until they get into honors, they are undergraduate students, they do the course, they're in, out, but you don't really know that much about them. And that's also been my own experience as a student. I can't even remember the names of the professors that I learnt from. I can't remember my average day. It's all a bit of a blur. So what I'm really going to be talking about is my interaction from postgraduate onwards, which I guess is from when I arrived in South Africa in '93. So how did it start? Well, this was my mentor as a student. I arrived in South Africa in '93, and I knew I wanted to be in oceanography. I had no idea where to go to. Just some, and actually John Rogers from the Marine Geoscience units put me in touch with Johan. And he was my mentor for many, many years. And in fact, right up until his death in 2011. And there are many of us attached to today's talk that have grown up also under Johan. I guess Sebastian Swart being the one that I think of the most, just because he sort of was part of that growing up with Johan as sort of this A-rated scientist. And Johan really put the department on the map. He was the grandfather of the Agulhas current. He was an A-rated scientist, and he was a very respected and highly distinguished, internationally recognized scientist. And he was my mentor, and I learned so much from him. I was at times a little bit nervous of him to knock on his door. He was always very friendly, always very respectable, respective of my time and any worries that I had. He would always listen. But he was this big guy. He really, and I would really think twice about sort of pushing my worries onto him, because he was very important. And what I thought was great about him was he got me to do the things he didn't want to do, which I thought was quite clever. So he would get me to lecture. He would tell me to attend meetings. I would go on cruises for him. And these were things that he had to do, you know, as a full professor at UCT. But he also realized that here was someone who was quite keen to get going, who took the initiative, who had energy, who had ambition. And you know what? I don't want to do it. Let me get Isabelle to do it. And it was a very, very good relationship, because I just grabbed every opportunity I could from him. He encouraged me to always find funding. Johan was always quite careful about money. He didn't really want to splash out too often, and he would push me to find money. And he would always say, I will give you a rand for a rand that you bring in. And, you know, even if I couldn't find funding, at least I tried, and that was good enough for him. And I really learned under him that just give it a go. It doesn't matter if you don't get it, because at least your supervisor or your professor or whoever that you're working with, even the head of department, really appreciates the effort that you've put into try and source some funding. Of course, if you get to conferences, you get to start networking, and he was very good at pushing me to do that. He taught me the motto of publish or perish. Johan was all about publications. He was about getting those papers out, and every week he would update his CV. You know, this was a guy that was publishing 20, 25 publications a year. He was everywhere, in every journal. He worked with all the international institutes, universities, anyone involved in Southern Ocean, South Atlantic, South Indian, or Agulhas current. And he really believed you had to get your papers out. And I really valued Werner's talk earlier, because it's true. No one's going to read a thesis. They're going to read your publications. And Johan really was the kingmaster for that. And under his mentorship, I realized the importance of taking the initiative. He would do anything for you, providing you put that first step forward. He would always accommodate any of your wishes. He would listen to your worries, but you had to make the first step. He was busy. He was always out there. And that I learned from him. Take that initiative. And it was a very valued lesson I learned from Johan. And of course, he was very fatherly as well. He was a wonderful professor. He was a very old school professor. But what I really enjoyed was he was quite mischievous. And an example of that was I'd never really learned Afrikaans. He was Afrikaans to the bone. And he would often send me on these meetings where he would write the report on where I had to represent him in Afrikaans. And I would sit there reading this thing, not knowing, oh, that's my washing machine going, not knowing how to string a sentence along. And he would say, yeah, I've been warning you for a long time, you need to learn Afrikaans. And he would always tease me about being a little bit too English, I think. But we had a lot of fun together, and it was a very, very sad day when I heard the news of his passing. But he's very fondly remembered, and he really is the professor that I remember the most. And my undergrad days, I remember, as I said, very little. But really my academic life started with Johan. So let me go down to this one, always hangs a little bit. Let me just, whoops, sorry, we'll get there in a moment. Whoops. Okay, here we go. So moving on from being mentored by Johan, I became a postdoc and a lecturer. And of course, one of the things that Johan didn't want to do was go to sea. He wanted to spend time either going to institutes or international institutes or staying at home with his family. And so I really started interacting with students, and I grew up as a lecturer or as a postdoc. I grew up with these students. And these are some photos that I absolutely love, because the top photo, what you see there are people like Sandy Tamala, Juliet Hermes, Kim Bernard, who's a professor at Oregon State. You see Jenny Veach. You see Mtu Gulikana, who's now sort of a big hotshot at DEA. These are guys that we all went to see together. We learned how to run the oceanography program together. We grew up together, and I really valued those days. And then, of course, the slide below, you can see Marcel and his wife, of course, Jen now. There's a whole bunch of characters there. My 20s class, and yet I still felt very much connected with these students. We were young together, young at heart together. We had a lot to learn together. It was a time of adventure, pioneering science, and hands-on training. And we as a group of students were kind of all in it together, and I felt that I could interact with growing up together. But as I got older, and of course the students tend to stay the same age, I felt the need to push students to find funding and to become like a sort of a mini Johan, to take the initiative, to build a network and to attend meetings. Suddenly I felt myself not wanting always to get on a plane and go overseas, but encourage the students to do that. And so, my mentor became me. I started becoming that mentor to my students. And of course, we had a lot of fun in those days. And I'm going to show you some photos. One of them is with Sebastian that I remember from a cruise in 2004, which is 16 years ago, when Sebastian was an honors student. So this is us on the academic Vavilov going to South Georgia. We had a pikey party after the movie Snack. There is Sebastian and two French technicians that came from IFRIMA and myself with blacked out teeth. But these are the students that today are now professors, or they are leading very large teams wherever they are. But we grew up together. We had this fun together, and there is that glue that binds us because of those many shared experiences. But of course, we all get older. I get older, but the intake of students, they're always the same age. Your second year class are always going to be 19 or 20. The intake into honors will always be about 21. But I'm no longer 26 anymore. I'm now 51, and I don't have the stamina that these students that I had. So what is my advice now? Well, as the HOD, maybe I have another role. My role maybe is not totally research related or training of students, but perhaps it's to give guidance and to have an open door policy and to give support to students when they feel that they have reached a wall and they're not sure where to go, whether it's with their studies, whether it's with their supervisor. And I feel that I've learned an awful lot over the years, that I feel that I have that ability to talk to students, to talk to them on the same level, to have that open door policy, which I think is critical. I think it's important to listen to students, to hear what their different needs are. It can be finances, it can be problems within the department, problems at home, study worries or supervisors. I've been through that myself. I've experienced it when I worked with Johan, and I knew what it was and what it meant to be able to just share that. And I understand that maybe as head of department, people are maybe nervous to come into my door, but that's why we've got Kashifa. Kashifa is great. She is really the go-to person, and often she talks to me and then I interact with the student sort of via Kashifa's door. I think it's important to offer support to students and to take an interest in what they do and find out what rocks their world a little bit, so that you break down the barriers of head of department or supervisor to that level that I had with the students when I was growing up with them, where we were all working together on the APECSSA, having fun, but working hard on doing really interesting scientific questions. And stay connected. I'm quite late on WhatsApp in my life, but I really feel that it's important to buzz students on WhatsApp, stay connected, because that's really how they interact with everyone. And there have been some wonderful programs last week where WhatsApp was going crazy with a lot of our students, wonderful students who were really getting involved on this Twittergram and just kind of championing the kind of science that we're doing in South Africa. And it was really exciting to follow that last week. And of course, make the students feel that they're part of the department. We're not always good at that. We sometimes don't always hear that as supervisors, but I really feel as HOD, that is what I want to do. I want to make sure that students have a voice and that we are hearing it and that they're not shy to be heard as well. So my role has gone from being the student under Johan to being a sort of a lecturer and a supervisor where I've grown up with these students to now maybe a more sort of senior academic. So I think students, what they need, what we want is, of course, students need practical guidance to help to how to get the job done. Of course, they need support. It can be financial, equipment, mentorship. And I understand that students are often quite nervous to ask for money. I used to stress about knocking on Johan's door to say just a little top up. And I really, sometimes one has to sort of initiate that conversation. I understand that there's a need for career guidance, accessing networks, inspiration, and of course that open door policy is paramount to the success of this relationship with the students. But of course, for supervisors, make no mistake that it's also very important for a supervisor having students, because joint publications is also one's own career enhancement. And my immersion has often, it's gone on hard work, but a lot of that has been on the backs of students who've been incredible students who've written wonderful papers. And of course, I've been able to add that to my own CV. So make no mistake that there has to be that mutual benefit amongst supervisors and students. And it really is there. And I totally understand the importance of that student and supervisor role. So what is the take-home message, I think? Well, I gave it some thought this morning when I was busy putting this slide together. I think the main word is to show. So what do I mean by show? Well, show initiative. Show that you're interested. If a student is interested and shows the initiative, the supervisor, the head of department will put the building blocks in place. In the same way, if a supervisor shows initiative on a study, well, you've got the student who's probably doing the groundwork to move forward with that initiative as well. It's great solving puzzles together, having a question, having a conversation over coffee and putting that sort of jigsaw puzzle together to try and work out what is going on, whatever that research question might be. Spirit and engagement is critical, both supervisor and student, to show that. And I think having that wonderful spirit is really exciting when you have that relationship. To show a sense of wanting to be part of a department, both supervisor and student. It's wonderful to see students in the tea room, for instance, talking, but supervisors need to be there as well to interact. And I think that's important. In the same way that supervisors are watching students, I totally get that students, of course, are watching their supervisors as well. To show respect for all, of course, that goes without saying. To have that mutual respect between your student and supervisor relationship is critical. Tenacity, don't give up, keep going, keep plodding along, keep fighting whatever problem that you have. You will get to the end of it. You will find a solution between yourselves, whether it's a research question, whether it's a problem amongst yourselves. It's not always an easy ride between a student and a supervisor. I often had a bumpy ride with Johan, but we always managed to sort out the problems that we had. is big. No matter how difficult your studies are, you will always find a way. And I think if you show these things, and I'm sure there are many other pointers that I didn't really think about this morning, but these are the ones that really sort of glare out to me when I think of how to make a relationship between a student and supervisor successful and really positive. And my last slide, this is the semester 2016, but this just shows some of the students from UCT that joined the semester. And I think, well, the one thing that students have done for me is they've kept me really young. They've kept me wanting to keep going with science. They've kept me kind of quite perky in the mornings, and it's been a lot of fun. And I've really enjoyed my years as a lecturer, as a teacher, as a mentor, and now as head of department. And I always feel that I hope that I continue to make that strong contribution to shaping the lives of students in whichever direction they go in their academic or commercial career paths that they take. And I think I'll end there. Thank you.
Thanks, Iz. That was really nice. And, you know, having your perspective from postgrad lecturer, now mentor, is really useful, because I think, you know, a lot of the early career scientists involved in APECS and beyond are, you know, trying to make that transition between being a student and now being a supervisor. So having your insight on that is very valuable. We have time for one or two questions, and I have one here, which you spoke about mutual respect between your student and supervisor. But I guess not all personalities get along, and when you can't establish that sort of, maybe not respect, but when you don't really get along with your supervisor or student, vice versa, like what do you think is sort of the conflict resolution? Can you take a project or research somewhere else, or what do you do?
Look, I've had that with a student in 2006, where there was a problem between myself and the student, and I was quite surprised by it. And actually the head of department stepped in and was a mediator and basically broke down what the problem was. And quite often when you see what the problem is, it's really nothing. And it was just a sort of misunderstanding. It was to do with a co-authorship problem, and it was just a simple misunderstanding of what the student wanted and what I had put down. And I feel that these misunderstandings happen because maybe a student feels awkward or a supervisor feels awkward to have that conversation. And quite often you can't do everything online. You can't do everything by email or on WhatsApp. You've got to knock on the door and make time to sit and thrash out any problems. I've never seen where the whole relationship is broken down, where I have not been able to work at all with a student. I've always been very lucky, and I've always really enjoyed the students that I've had. But I think at that point, and if a head of department's unable to assist, one can take it to within the university to the next level, which could be the Deputy Dean of Affairs, and then you have a sort of mediation discussion. At that point, if you still can't work and you can't still go forward, then I think that's where you get sort of an external facilitator in to take that conversation forward. Yeah, it's not always easy, but I would say 9 out of 10 is normally a lack of communication or a misunderstanding, which is probably quite easily resolved over sort of even a simple lunch together, where you just go, you get out of the work environment and you sit down and you act like humans and talk things through. Yeah, I don't know if that answers that question, yeah. But that is my experience. Is have that conversation. Don't hide behind your computer and your just talk it through. Yeah.
So I guess then maybe what you're saying is that sort of having sort of clear communication between the student supervisor about, you know, who is responsible for what.
Absolutely.
You know, in that relationship is probably a good idea.
That's the importance of the MOU that students have with the supervisors. Look, this is for UCT, and I'm sure all universities have an MOU between supervisor and student, and it's really up to the student to write everything down, everything that they want to see coming out of that study, the opportunities, the finances, the international meetings, whatever that might be. Put it down on paper, because it's hard to go back afterwards to say, no, but I meant that. Well, why didn't you write it down? So you have to be very upfront. You have to be very level. You be with what you want. Don't, as I said, don't hide behind an email or a WhatsApp messaging. Go into your office, sit down with your supervisor, and have that conversation. I was really surprised when I found out that there was this problem with this student in 2006, because at no point did I ever know that there was this problem until suddenly the head of department walked into my office, and I was taken aback. So don't go to that point. Don't get there. Rather, get to that conversation with your supervisor first. Yeah.
So then how, I mean, as a student, trying to sort of decide, let's say an early postgrad student trying to decide their direction, do they base this on like the supervision characteristics? So in a department, you're looking at your different supervisors and saying, I enjoy this supervisor. Do you base it on, the research that obviously the research you're interested in is important, but in terms of career development, let's say, how would you say a student should go about it?
So everyone is different, but I think that for me, when I was a student, I worked really well with Johan. I found it very easy to engage with him. I knew I could knock on his door if I had a problem. I mean, sometimes I was a little bit nervous to do that, just because of the age difference and because he was this big professor, internationally recognized. But he never made me feel foolish. Whenever I had a question that I didn't understand, or a sort of a research problem, I felt comfortable. And I always think that, to me, I think that's the most important thing, that you have a comfortable relationship with your supervisor, because if you don't, then you can always massage the research question about what really interests you, and you can move along and meander as you go along your academic career path. But if you are unsettled or nervous to speak to your supervisor, it's always going to be difficult, because you're always going to have to go and speak to that person to say, I don't get this, or please read this, or I found this conference, can you help me? You've got to be able to get past that door. So you've got to be able to have an open door policy with your supervisor. And I really think that if you don't have that, it's going to make it very hard, or just so much harder being a student. But others maybe don't feel the need for that, and they just want to go by what really floats their boat and what really interests them in their research, and they see a vision going forward, and they want to be an ocean modeler, and that's where they're going to go. And then that's what drives them. But for me, it was always accessibility to my supervisor. I think that's key here.
Yeah, so just to close off, one final question. Then, and I guess this leads on to that. It's like, is there an unwritten rule of how long you should stay with a supervisor? I was with you throughout my postgrad life, and it was a success, but, is there value in changing your supervisor and project and things like that?
Yeah, look, one can be a little bit too in-house as well. I mean, if I think about myself, I did masters with Johan, I did a PhD with Johan, I did a postdoc with Johan. I always remember that at some point I felt I needed to get away. But the longer I stayed with him, the harder it was to break away. And I remember he wanted to send me to do a postdoc with Igor Belkin in Rhode Island in America. But I was so settled in South Africa, I think I just got married and I didn't want to leave. And in some ways that wasn't good. I'd spent so many years with Johan, and I'd only learned from Johan. What I did to sort of counteract that was I developed a sort of an international network where I started working with other groups, other international teams. And I was very lucky because Johan, as he was getting sicker and sicker with cancer, he was just sending me out to represent him at all these meetings. But I think one needs to really think about that. I would say if you do a master's with a supervisor, you could stay on for a PhD, but postdoc, you should move away. And you can always come back. That supervisor is always going to be there for you, or have them as a co-supervisor, but one needs to break that umbilical cord. Mine was very strong. It never quite broke, but you need to get other experiences under your belt as well. It's important for your CV. And publications, really important for your CV. You've got to get those papers out. That's what people read. They're not going to read your thesis. They're going to read those papers.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks, Yes. That was really great. We could chat for a lot longer on this, but we have to move on. Thanks very much.